You know, history isn't always made by the big names, the generals and presidents you read about in textbooks. Sometimes it's built, literally, board, by ordinary people. And today, we've got the remarkable true story of one of those builders. He was a carpenter, a farmer, a soldier, and his life tells the story of America's birth, almost entirely in his own words.
Okay, so let's set the scene. The year is 1787. The American Revolution is over, the smoke has cleared, and the United States is this fragile, brand new thing. In a small home in Massachusetts, a 53-year-old carpenter named Norman Seaver gathers his kids around him. He feels it's time. He's about to tell them his life story. And what they don't know is that his story is, in so many ways, the story of America itself.
All right, so let's dive into Norman's story. It starts way back in 1734 in colonial Sudbury, Massachusetts. Now you gotta understand, he was born into a world where your own two hands were your most valuable asset. And the lessons he picked up as a boy, especially from his father, well, they were gonna shape literally everything he ever did.
So Norman's dad, Robert, he was a master bricklayer, a guy who built things to be true and square, as they'd say. But Norman, he was different. He was drawn to wood, its warmth, its grain. He chose to be a carpenter. And yeah, the materials were totally different, brick versus wood, but the core idea he got from his dad, it was exactly the same. It was all about this deep, deep respect for craftsmanship.
And this right here, this one piece of advice, became his North Star. Any man can stack bricks. A craftsman builds something that'll stand for generations. I mean, think about that. For Norman, it wasn't just about stacking bricks or sawing timber. It was a philosophy for everything. For building a life, for raising a family, and, as it turns out, for building a nation that was meant to last.
So, that whole principle of building things to last, well, that carried right on into the next big phase of his life. As a young man, Norman strikes out on his own, and he begins what you could call his other great life's project, building a family. And it was all founded on this incredible partnership he had with his wife, Sarah.
And their life together was, wow, it was one of constant motion. They were always pushing west, deeper into the frontier. From Sudbury, they moved to Shrewsbury. And then, finally, they put down roots in Westminster. And you have to realize, each one of these moves was a huge gamble. I mean, they were betting everything on their own hard work and resilience, clearing new land to build a future for a family that just kept on growing.
13 children. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. That is a staggering number by today's standards, right? But it really speaks to the reality of that time and to the incredible strength of the partnership between Norman and Sarah. They weren't just building a farm, you see. They were literally populating a new world, one child at a time.
But, while Norman was busy building his family and his farm, a storm was gathering on the horizon, a storm that was about to change absolutely everything. We're talking, of course, about the American Revolution, and this is the story of how this humble carpenter and father answered the call to fight.
And when that first alarm sounded from Lexington and Concord in April of 1775, look, Norman was not some young kid looking for glory and adventure. Not at all. He was 41 years old. He had a wife, a bustling farm, a house packed with kids. He had absolutely everything to lose. And yet, he went. He picked up his musket and marched, all driven by this simple, powerful conviction that it was the right thing to do.
And his commitment? It was rock solid. He didn't just show up for a few days and go home. He started out as a militiaman, right there in the first chaotic days of the war. But his character, his steadiness, it earned him the trust of the men around him. And so he rose through the ranks, from ensign, and eventually he was commissioned as a first lieutenant in the actual Continental Army. That's a big deal.
But Norman, in his own words, made sure to honor the other side of the war. Because while he was off serving, his wife Sarah was fighting her own brutal battle back on the home front. She was the one managing the farm, raising all those children, and somehow holding their entire world together. It was its own kind of war, a war of pure endurance and resilience, and one fought without any glory or commission. Which brings us right back to where we started, back to that fireside in 1787. The war is won, the nation is born, and now you have Norman, the old soldier, the master craftsman, and he's boiling down the wisdom of his entire life for his kids.
So what does he tell them? He boils it all down to these 5 essential truths. First, work hard and do it right, because a good name is worth more than gold. Second, family is everything. It's your greatest legacy.
Third, stand up for what's right, even if you have to risk it all. Fourth, this new country, this land is worth fighting for. And finally, number 5, trust in God, but keep your powder dry. In other words, pair your faith with practical action. This was the legacy he wanted to leave them. Not land, not money, but a code for how to live. And then he takes all of that, all his work, all his service, his love for his family, and he distills it into one simple, incredibly powerful charge. Work hard, love each other, stand for what's right, and make me proud. Man, that's really the heart of it all, isn't it? His entire hope for their future, all wrapped up in those few words.
And this is where the story gets so incredibly poignant. Just weeks after sitting down and sharing his life's wisdom with his family, Norman died. He was raising the frame of a new meeting house he was building for the town, and he fell. He died doing exactly what he always did, building something strong, something that would last for the community. That fireside chat, it wasn't just a collection of stories. It turned out to be his final testament, delivered, without him even knowing, just in the nick of time.
Think about it. Norman Seaver helped build a family, a community, and yeah, a country. That meeting house he was raising when he died, it stood for over a century. His life is this powerful reminder that it's often the so-called ordinary people, guided by simple, strong principles, who are the ones really building history. And so, his story leaves us with a pretty big question to ask ourselves, doesn't it? His work stood for generations. What will ours?